In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse in the Bible is easy to believe. Why? Because if there is a God who created this entire space-time continuum out of nothing, out of what rocks dream about, then can he do anything he wants inside the space-time continuum that he created? Of course he can. He can intervene in it. The greatest miracle is creation. If creation is true, every other verse is easy to believe. Can God part the Red Sea if he created the Red Sea? Can he raise Jesus from the dead if he created the human body of Jesus? Or Lazarus or anybody else risen in the Bible? Can he make a man stay in a fish for 3 days and have him survive? Of course he can. He created the fish and he created man. He created everything here. The greatest miracle has already occurred. You may have heard about the Salvation Army girl who was at Walmart celebrating Christmas. And she's standing out there, and skeptic came up. She had her Bible there, and the skeptic said, "You don't believe that Bible, do you?" And she goes, "Well, I sure do. Of course I do." And he said, "Come on, how can you believe the Bible? It's got stupid miracles in it, like Jonah. Who could believe Jonah? I mean, the gastronomical juices would eat that guy up if he ever got in the belly of a great fish." And in her simple face, she said, "Well, I just believe it. You know, I just have faith that it's true." And he said, "Well, how could God have done that, even if it was possible?" She said, "Well, I don't know, but when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jonah how he did it, or how it happened." And the skeptic said, "What if Jonah isn't in heaven?" And she said, "Well, then you ask him." So point 3, miracles not only are possible, they're actual. It's already occurred. This universe is a miracle itself. Now, one quick aside. We got to move on here, but one quick aside. You say, well, you know, it seemed like there's a lot more miracles in the Bible than we seem to see today. Let me just point out that how many miracles are in the Bible? About 300. Do they all occur uniformly? No, they don't. The Bible covers about 1,500 years. That would mean there'd be one miracle every about 5 years or so. Is that the way they occur? No. How do they occur? They occur in bunches. Where do they occur? Other than creation, they occur around Moses. Then they occur around Elijah and Elisha. And then they occur around Jesus and the apostles. Why there? Because a miracle is a sign to confirm a sermon. A miracle is a miracle, or a miracle is a sign that confirms a message. The miracle confirms the message. The sign confirms the sermon. When God has some new revelation, he says, "I'm going to prove to you that this new revelation is indeed from me," by pouring out miracles on these guys. Why might we not see miracles as often as they did in the New Testament or in the Old Testament? Because there's no new revelation to confirm. There are no new prophets. The canon is closed. It's done. There's no need. There's no need to confirm it anymore. It's already been confirmed. Truth exists. God exists. Miracles are possible. What about this New Testament? Let's take a look at the New Testament. I'll give you 3 E's. Write down 3 E's if you're taking notes here and can keep up. The 3 E's you have to know about the New Testament is that the New Testament documents, number 1, are early. Number 2, they are eyewitness. In other words, there's eyewitness testimony in it. And number 3, and this is going to sound funny, they're embarrassing. Embarrassing? We'll get to it in a minute. First of all, let's talk about the fact that the New Testament documents are early and eyewitness. Some skeptics say the New Testament's written down late. That means you can't trust it. Not so. How do we know? First of all, even liberals agree that 1 Corinthians was written by 55 A.D. And that's probably the best evidence we have for the resurrection, because you look at 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15 has testimony from all the way back to the event. I don't have time to go into it now, but if you look up 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8, it's a creed that they recited, that they could easily remember. that scholars say goes all the way back to the resurrection itself, a creed that talks about what happened to Jesus. You need to look that up on your own. That evidence is very early. There is no way it's mythological. Secondly, not only is 1 Corinthians written by 55, we know that Acts, the book of Acts from which we just read, was written by 62. There's a number of reasons for that. They're all in the book. You can get it. But we know that Acts is written by 62. If Acts is written by 62, what's written before Acts? Who wrote Acts, by the way? Luke. Luke wrote his gospel before Acts. How do we know? Because in Acts he says, in my former work, O excellent Theophilus. So Luke is before 62. If Luke is before 62, he's within 30 years of the crucifixion and resurrection. Now let me ask you a question. You got 1 Corinthians at 55. You've got Luke, say, around 60, and Acts at 62. Is there any way you can interview eyewitnesses, if you're not an eyewitness yourself, as Luke was, to figure out what happened? Could you figure out what happened, say, 25, 30 years ago by going to people who were there? Could you figure out, say, what happened in the 1980 presidential election by interviewing people? Sure, you can interview people who were there, interview people who voted, interview even candidates if you wanted to. Right? You can figure out what happened very easily. These are early documents. Also, they're eyewitness documents. Let me point out one thing. Go to Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3. As I read Luke chapter 3, the first 2 verses, let me ask you this. Ask yourself as I read it, does it sound like Luke is making up a story? Here you go. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod, tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Licinius, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the desert. Sound like he's making up a story? No, it's not once upon a time. He's putting historical crosshairs on the time by naming people. In fact, there are 8 people named right here, all known through secular history to have existed at this time in these positions. Luke's not making up a story. Also, if you look at the second half of Acts from where we just read, particularly chapters 13 to the end of the book, there are 84 eyewitness details that are known to be eyewitness details through other historical means, through either archaeology or other writings, secular writings. They know that these details are true. Luke's not making up a story. He's writing history. He's not writing fiction. There's eyewitness details in there. Now, there's over 30 other historical figures, by the way, or I should say just more than 30 historical figures in the New Testament that we know did what the Bible says they did, were in the positions the Bible says they were in, from secular sources. People like Agrippa, we know him from Josephus. People like Caiaphas, people like Pilate. All these people are known to have existed at the time doing the things the Bible says they did. This is not a myth. Now, the third E, embarrassing. There's a principle that historians use when they're trying to figure out whether an historical text is true. And one of the principles is called the principle of embarrassment. It goes like this. If there's something embarrassing about the author or authors in the text, it's probably true. Why? Why? Because the tendency is, if you're making up a story, you're not going to put embarrassing things in there about yourself, right? You want to take those things out. Well, it turns out the New Testament is filled with embarrassing stuff about the people who wrote it. Let's just go through a few of them real quickly. First of all, you notice the apostles, the guys who wrote this stuff down, admitted that they were dim-witted. How many times did they not know what Jesus was talking about? How many times? Also, not only are they dim-witted, they are uncaring. Jesus says, stay up with me and pray. What do they wind up doing? They wind up conking out on him twice in his greatest hour of need. Not only that, they don't even give him a proper burial. Who does? Joseph of Arimathea, member of the Sanhedrin, a member of the very ruling council that sentenced Jesus to die. They say they weren't there. Joseph buried him. Why would they say that? And by the way, they put him in a Jewish tomb, too. Why would they say they put him in a Jewish tomb if they're making up a story? The Jews could have easily refuted that, right? They could have gone to the tomb, taken out the body, and said, this is nonsense.